a core of scientists who are ever growing ever larger. You know what I mean? As they examine the data, there was something sort of approaching that a little bit back in the 1960s. Now it's just sort of a massive retreat from the subject.
Do you think that's by design to some extent? I know in your original book, The UFO Controversy in America, you had written about the Robertson panel, of course, that even openly, or not openly, but they discussed, as we learned years later, a policy of debunking, of stripping UFOs of their aura of mystery, I think was the term they used. And
that's
they launched,
exactly right.
Yeah, they launched a program back there, and it sure seems like that's what's happened today.
Yeah, it's unclear as to whether they actually launched a program. The Robertson panel, which was a panel of scientists convened by the CIA in 1952 and met in 1953, recommended that the Air Force do that. Whether or not that actually was done is problematic. They recommended that they use Walt Disney Production, that they use Arthur Godfrey,
right.
People like that, and but none of that ever happened, as far as we know. However, it was a group of scientists who were primarily hostile to the subject, but what we're looking for, of course, is a large group of scientists who are establishment scientists who might be working on the subject on the sly, who might be interested in it, and we don't have that evidence anymore. And I've been in academics all my life, and of course I'm still teaching at Temple University in Philadelphia, and I can tell you that the atmosphere at Temple is fairly hostile to the subject, much more so than when I first came there.
Well, what's it like for you being there? I mean, you've got the website of your organization, the Center for Studying Abduction Research, and I wonder if you catch the same kind of flack that, say, John Mack of Harvard caught while he was still alive.
Well, to a degree. I mean, John's is a little bit different than mine. With me, most people, it's divided by departments. The psychology department and people who are in physics or some of the hard sciences, I just think I'm a complete lunatic. There's no mitigation of those feelings. That's it. People in my department don't understand me. All they know is that what I'm studying is not history, and therefore there is a certain price to pay when you are in a history department, and you're doing sort of a historical analysis of it, but at the same time doing abduction research and all that, and so like John Mack, there is a price to pay, I must say,
but nothing to the point where your tenure is in danger or anything like that.
There was talk about it some years back, but no, and my tenure is not in danger, and I doubt if John's actually was in danger either, to tell you the truth, because it's very difficult to throw somebody out who has tenure, particularly a person like John Mack with his stature. But with me, it's just the fact that it has essentially put a crimp, let's just say, to put it mildly, in my career upward and onward in the historical profession. So,
how did you make the transition into focusing on the alien abduction stuff? I mean, that first book, it's a broad-ranging look at the paper trail and documents and secret studies and things of that sort. How did you land on the doorstep of abductions?
Well, after I finished my dissertation, I taught at the University of Nebraska for a year, and then I came to Temple University, and I was continuing to work in the field, giving papers on it, and I was like, and I'm sorry if people have heard me talk about this before, but I was like most other UFO researchers in the early 70s, not very much interested in the abduction phenomenon whatsoever. Because the problem with abductions in those days is we just didn't have enough cases to have serious patterns come about, which could give us something to sink our teeth into. We had Barney Bay Hill case, of course, and then we'd have Travis Walton, and we had Pascagoula, and some other cases that Leo Sprinkle had gotten, and James Harder, and so forth. But it really wasn't enough, and so most people were very, very interested in the subject, but there's a lot of people out there who are just plain crazy, or who just are delusionary, or who have very vivid dreams that they're mistake for reality, or whatever. And so you're looking for data that's ultimately in a pattern, and that means that you've got to have a larger group. So I, like almost everybody else in UFO research, was very, very wary of abductions. And I read a couple of books on the subject. Of course, I read everything in those days that came out about the subject of UFOs and abductions. But it wasn't convincing to me. It just wasn't compelling. And I told this horrible story before, but I'll tell it again. In 1981, I spoke at a conference that the Center for UFO Studies put on. I guess it was their first conference. Might have been their first one. And it was in Evanston, Illinois. And Bud Hopkins was there, who presented a paper on abductions. And I thought to myself, should I just waste my time by sitting in an audience listening to somebody talk about the abduction phenomena? Or should I go out in the hallway and talk with my friend Marcello Truzzi and exchange jokes with him? And my pathway was clear. I knew what I had to do. I mean, I ran out into the hall and spent the entire time talking with Marcello while Bud gave this paper on abductions, because joking around was much more important than hearing that paper. So that was sort of my level of comprehension about the subject and of interest in it.
Well, that's the view that's shared by so many academics and scientists.
A year later, however, a mutual friend of ours, Tracy Torme, who was a Hollywood producer and did Fire in the Sky and so forth, called me up. He was very much interested in the abduction phenomenon, and I knew him. And he had some information about where there was sort of a secret group of people who were heading the conspiracy to hide whatever. And I had to come. He wanted to meet me in New York City, and because he couldn't talk over the phone and tell me this and that and so forth. And so I went up to New York City to see him, and he gave me some information that turned out to be not exactly correct, but at the time it seemed interesting. And then he said, "Well, let's go over to my friend Bud Hopkins' house." I said, "No, I don't think so, Tracy. I just don't know about that. I knew he was into abductions, and it was just going to be a waste of time." He said, No, come on over. Come with me. We're going over there. Well, he's a nice guy. No. So he finally convinced me to come in, and we get in the cab and go over to his house. He lives in the Chelsea area of New York City. And I met Bud Hopkins, having forgotten that I had actually shaken hands with him the year before. I didn't even remember that. And when I met Bud, he immediately impressed me. And if anybody's ever met